Isla Hart stood before her mirror, barely recognizing the girl reflected there. Her fingers trembled as she smoothed down the hideous dress she had chosen for tonight. The fabric was a washed-out beige that did nothing for her complexion, the cut shapeless and outdated. It was the worst dress she owned, perhaps the worst dress in existence, and that was exactly why she wore it. Every unflattering detail was intentional. If I look unlovable, I can't be sold. I can't be noticed, she told herself. The mantra steadied her nerves as she pinned back a loose strand of her brown hair. In the mirror, her hazel eyes looked dull and resigned. Good, she thought. Better dull than desperate. Down the hall, her father's voice rang out sharply. Ayla, get down here. Our guest will arrive any minute. Ayla's stomach twisted at the command. She knew better than to keep Caleb Hart waiting. Gripping the skirt of her dress, she stepped into her low heels. Plain, scuffed things that didn't match the elegant image her father wanted, and headed for the door. As she reached the top of the grand staircase, her father's voice drifted up again, cold and firm. And for God's sake, smile, behave, don't embarrass me tonight. For a second, Ayla closed her eyes. Smile, behave. The words echoed in her head like a prison warden's orders. She forced a deep breath, plastering a practiced neutral expression on her face. And don't embarrass me. It was Caleb's golden rule. And tonight, of all nights, he was especially on edge. Ayla descended the marble steps, her hand sliding along the banister for support. Below, the foyer gleamed under the chandelier's light. Two of her father's suited security men stood by the door, awaiting the guest. She could see the tension even in their stiff postures. Her father stood by the door as well, straightening his cuffs. Caleb Hart was every bit the imposing businessman, tall and silver-haired, and his presence filling the space with an air of authority. When he looked up and saw Ayla coming down, his eyes narrowed at her attire. A flash of displeasure crossed his face, but he masked it just as quickly. He'd deal with her defiance later, she was sure. Before either of them could speak, the doorbell chimed. Ayla flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. This was it. The important friend had arrived. One of the security men opened the heavy oak door. Cool evening air swirled in as a figure stepped inside, flanked by two bodyguards of his own. Ayla tried to swallow her dread. Just be invisible, she prayed. Let him focus on father. Welcome, Caleb greeted the guest with a politician's smile. I'm so glad you could join us tonight. The man who entered inclined his head. Mr. Hart, he greeted evenly. His voice was deep, calm, yet there was something in it that made Ayla's spine prickle. He stepped fully into the light, and Ayla felt the blood drain from her face. The guest was not the paunchy older politician she'd been bracing for. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and unmistakably younger than her father's usual associates. A black tailored suit accentuated his strong frame, and when he removed a sleek overcoat, the ease of his movements exuded controlled power. Ayla's gaze lifted to the man's face, and the world tilted beneath her. She knew that face. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, dark hair swept back. Those features had haunted her dreams and nightmares in equal measure. It was a face she never thought she'd see again. It was Adrien Viscari. Ayla's heart slammed against her ribs. Her vision tunneled for an instant as shock rolled through her. No, it can't be. Adrien? But there he stood, in the flesh, right beside her father. The very same Adrien she had once loved with every fiber of her being, before he'd disappeared from her life, leaving her with nothing but a shattered heart and a single cruel message. She gripped the banister tightly, knuckles white. Blood roared in her ears. Had her father known? Had he invited this guest on purpose? Ayla. Her father's voice cut through her haze, abruptly jovial. Come here, my dear. Caleb beckoned her forward. Mr. Viscari, allow me to introduce my daughter, Ayla Hart. Somehow, Ayla forced her legs to carry her the rest of the way down. She approached on unsteady feet, wishing the floor would just swallow her whole. Her worst nightmare and deepest longing stood mere feet away, contained in the same man. Adrien turned toward her fully. His cool gray eyes landed on her, and in an instant, the polite mask he wore fell away. Ayla saw the recognition flare in his gaze, an intense, lightning strike of emotion crossing his features. "Ayla," he said, her name escaping his lips like a stunned exhale. Hearing him speak her name after all these years was a punch to her chest. Ayla's throat tightened, the words she'd prepared evaporating. She managed a stiff nod, unsure if her voice would even work. "Hello, Mr. Viscari," she murmured, eyes lowered. It was all she could trust herself to say. Adrien's brow furrowed, as if the formality hurt to hear. He opened his mouth, but whatever he meant to say died on his tongue. His eyes swept over her form, taking in the ill-fitting dress and the way she hunched her shoulders. Ayla felt exposed under that gaze, acutely aware of every awful detail of her appearance. Caleb cleared his throat pointedly, breaking the charged silence. Ayla nearly jumped. She could feel her father's displeasure radiating beside her at the awkward start. Adrien dragged his attention back to her father. He extended his hand to her in a courteous gesture. "Miss Hart," he said formally, though his tone held a quiet strain. "It's been a long time." Ayla hesitated, then placed her cold hand in his. The moment their palms touched, a spark of warmth shot up her arm, startling her. Adrien's grip was gentle, but she sensed the strength restrained there. As if he, too, remembered a different time, when holding her hand meant something else entirely. "Indeed," Ayla managed softly. Her eyes flickered up to meet his, just for a heartbeat. She saw turmoil there, a storm behind his composed expression. It matched the tempest inside her. Adrien released her hand, reluctance visible in the slow way his fingers slid away. Ayla's empty palm tingled where his warmth had briefly lived. Her father, impatient to regain control of the moment, gestured toward the dining room archway. "Shall we move to dinner? I've had our meal prepared. We have much to discuss, Mr. Viscari." Adrien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at the brusque interruption, but he nodded. "Of course." Caleb placed a firm hand on the small of Ayla's back, steering her forward to walk ahead. She felt the warning in that touch. Keep it together. She was trying. God, she was trying not to fall apart. As they moved toward the dining room, Ayla's mind raced. She dared a sideways glance at Adrien. He was walking beside her father now, listening as Caleb launched into polite small talk about the weather or the drive over, but she sensed Adrien's attention flickering back to her. What must he be thinking? The last time they saw each other, they'd been teenagers tangled in a passionate, secret romance, until the day he cut her off and vanished. And now here they were, practically strangers forced into the same space. Ayla swallowed hard, trying to contain the whirlwind inside her. One thing was painfully clear. Whatever business had brought Adrien Viscari here tonight, it was going to be a far more dangerous evening, for her heart at least, than she had anticipated. Dinner was served in a dining hall that managed to be both opulent and unwelcoming. A long mahogany table gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier. Ayla sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to make herself small in her chair. As usual, her father had placed her to his right, across from their guest. Adrien Viscari was seated directly across from Ayla. The candlelight cast shadows over his chiseled features, highlighting the intensity in his gray eyes each time he glanced her way. Ayla couldn't decide where to look. Meeting Adrien's gaze felt impossible, but staring at her plate made her feel even more exposed somehow. So she settled for focusing on the pattern of her fork on the fine china plate, listening to the low rumble of conversation between the two men. Caleb was in full charm mode, discussing economic forecasts and mutual acquaintances in the business world. It was surreal to hear her father speak so genially with Adrien, of all people. If only he knew. Or perhaps he did know, and simply didn't care about the old wounds he was reopening by seating them together. And as you may be aware, Caleb was saying smoothly to Adrien, the Heart Foundation has spearheaded numerous charitable initiatives in the city. My daughter here is the public face of our foundation's outreach programs. He turned to Ayla with a tight smile that didn't touch his eyes. Isn't that right, dear? Ayla blinked, drawn out of her fog by the cue. Her father expected her to echo the rehearsed lines. Yes, she said softly. We focus on educational grants and community health care. She managed to say the words, though her voice sounded thin to her own ears. Speak up, Caleb prompted, the edge in his tone masked by a chuckle as he looked to Adrien. My apologies, Mr. Vescary. She's usually more articulate, perhaps a bit shy this evening. A flush crept up Ayla's neck. Shy wasn't the word. She was suffocating under the weight of everything unsaid in the room. Still, she forced herself to continue, a practiced line tumbling out. I'm honored to be a part of it. The work is meaningful. Her father gave a curt nod of approval at her compliance. Adrien, who had been silent thus far, finally spoke. The Heart Foundation. Yes, I've heard of its activities. His gaze flickered to Ayla. It's admirable work. Ayla couldn't read his tone entirely. Was that genuine praise or polite small talk? She dared to glance up at him. His face was unreadable, but he held her gaze steadily for a moment. Warmth bloomed in her chest despite her anxiety. Of all the reactions she expected from Adrien, respect for what he thought she did with her life wasn't one of them. And it wasn't even true. Ayla knew she was a figurehead at best. Her father's team did all the decision-making. She just showed up where instructed and smiled for the cameras, all to polish the Hart family image. Caleb continued without missing a beat, launching into a self-congratulatory anecdote about a gala the foundation hosted last year. Ayla sat silently as the first course was served by discreet staff. She picked at her soup, appetite non-existent. Every so often, she felt Adrien's eyes on her. But when she looked up, he was focused on her father or on his meal. It left her doubting whether that moment of intensity earlier had been real or imagined. Perhaps he truly didn't care anymore. Perhaps the shock of seeing her had passed, and now she was no more than Caleb's daughter to him, a pawn in whatever negotiation they were tiptoeing around tonight. As I was saying, Caleb segued, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. Our family's reputation means everything. I've worked hard to ensure that no unsavory rumors plague our name. He smiled benignly at Ayla while saying this, but she felt the sting behind those words. Unsavory rumors, like the ones he quashed about her during her troubled years after Adrien left. Depression, therapy, that one overdose scare. Caleb had spun it all as a young girl's exhaustion and buried the rest. Ayla lowered her gaze, cheeks burning. Why did he have to allude to that now, in front of Adrien of all people? Of course, Adrien replied, voice cool. Reputation is paramount, and is... He set down his spoon, not touching the remainder of the soup. And I'm sure having Miss Hart as the face of your charitable work does wonders for that reputation. There was something in the way he said it. A subtle challenge. Ayla's eyes snapped up. Adrien's expression was mild, but his words... Was he implying something about Caleb's motives? Caleb's smile stiffened at the edges. It certainly helps that Ayla is passionate about our causes, though I admit it has the added benefit of keeping her productively occupied. Ayla's stomach twisted. Productively occupied. As if her every move wasn't orchestrated. As if she were some layabout who needed a manufactured purpose. She bit her tongue, tasting bitterness. Adrien's gaze slid to Ayla again. And is it what you want to do? He asked her directly. Working for the foundation? Ayla's heart skipped. No one ever asked her that. certainly not in front of her father. She felt Caleb's eyes drilling into her, even as he maintained a facade of pleasant interest. Ayla stammered, caught off guard. Under the table, her father's foot nudged hers, a warning. She forced a smile that probably looked as plastic as it felt. Of course. It's a privilege to help others. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Adrien's face remained polite, but something in his jaw tightened. He must have recognized the rote answer for what it was. Caleb smoothly shifted the conversation back to business. Mr. Viscari, about the proposal I mentioned. Before he could finish, Ayla, desperate for a moment of escape from this suffocating charade, quietly set down her napkin. "Excuse me," she murmured, pushing her chair back. Maybe she could steal away to the restroom, just for a minute of air. Her father's hand shot out and clamped over hers on the table before she could rise. The move was subtle to any outsider, appearing almost like a father gently staying his daughter. But Caleb's grip was vice-like on Ayla's fingers. She sucked in a breath at the flash of pain. Caleb gave her a cool, controlled smile. "Stay, Ayla. We're just getting to the interesting part. I need you here." His eyes locked onto hers, making it clear that no excuse would free her now. Ayla's cheeks burned with humiliation and hurt. "Father, please, Sit," he ordered under his breath, so quietly that only she could hear the steel in it. Alia's temper, long suppressed under layers of fear and guilt, flickered dangerously. The ache in her trapped fingers and the indignity of being treated like a disobedient child in front of Adrien ignited something inside her. She felt a tremor of rebellion. She yanked her hand free from her father's grasp. The legs of her chair scraped as she stood abruptly. "I'm not your decoration," Ayla said, her voice low but clear, each word trembling with repressed emotion. Caleb's eyes went wide with shock and fury at her audacity. For a heartbeat, the room was dead silent except for the faint clink of silverware. The two bodyguards at the far wall shifted, uncertain if this was something they should intervene in. The air crackled with tension. Ayla's chest heaved. She hadn't meant to blurt it out like that. Fear quickly flooded her boldness as she registered her father's expression. She took a step back, pulse pounding in her ears. Caleb rose from his chair slowly, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Ayla reflexively shrank away. She knew that look too well. A storm about to break. Before Caleb could reach for her or speak, another voice cut through the thick silence. "Let her go." Adrien's voice was quiet, almost gentle, yet it carried an unmistakable command that froze everyone in place. He hadn't raised it in the slightest, but the danger coiled in those 3 words was palpable. Ayla's gaze snapped to Adrien. He had also stood up, one hand braced on the table. His eyes were on Caleb's hand, which had lurched toward Ayla when she stood. Though her father wasn't touching her now, Adrien had clearly seen enough. Caleb turned his head slowly to fix Adrien with a look of polite confusion, as if not quite believing he'd heard correctly. "I beg your pardon?" Adrien's stare was icy calm. "You heard me." He nodded subtly toward Ayla, his posture poised and ready. "Let her go. She doesn't want to be here, and it seems this discussion is upsetting her." Ayla's breath caught. Adrien was standing up for her, against her father. The idea seemed to stun Caleb as well. Caleb's nostrils flared. "With all due respect, Mr. Viscari," he said, tightly controlled. "This is a family matter. My daughter is simply a bit overwrought. She knows better than to walk out on an important dinner." Adrien did not back down. If anything, his expression hardened further, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "Overwrought or not," he said evenly, "forcing her to stay will hardly help matters." Caleb bristled at the insinuation of force. He gave a thin smile that fooled no one. "Ayla and I will handle this. Pardon us a moment." He stepped toward Ayla, reaching as if to take her elbow. Ayla instinctively retreated another step, her heel bumping the chair behind her. Fear and adrenaline surged through her veins. She had never seen anyone challenge her father's authority like this. It was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. Adrien moved, swift and silent. In a blink, he rounded the table to stand at Ayla's side, facing Caleb. He did not touch her. He kept a respectful inch of space, but his presence alone was a solid wall between her and her father. Ayla stared at him, eyes wide. The heat radiating from Adrien's body was a shock so close to her, in contrast to Caleb's cold fury. Caleb's 2 security men edged forward uncertainly, but Caleb halted them with a raised hand. He wouldn't want a scuffle in front of a guest of Adrien's stature unless absolutely necessary. "Ayla," Caleb said in a dangerously calm tone, as if coaxing a skittish animal, "apologize to Mr. Viscari for this disruption and sit down." Ayla opened her mouth, but no apology came. She was trembling, still reeling from her own daring words and Adrien's intervention. She felt Adrien's eyes on her, steady and reassuring in their own way. "I think," Adrien interjected quietly, "an apology isn't necessary. In fact, I'd say it's I who should apologize for causing any discomfort. That was not my intention in coming here." Caleb's eyes snapped to Adrien. The undercurrent was clear. Adrien was not going to let him bully her, at least not openly. Ayla's heart was thundering. She wanted nothing more than to flee the room, but she also didn't want to ruin whatever business was at stake. The last thing she needed was for her father to punish her later for costing him a deal. She swallowed hard and forced out a shaky breath. "I'm fine," she said softly into the tense standoff. "I can stay. We can continue dinner." It was half a lie. She was far from fine, but backing down felt like the only way to diffuse this. Caleb watched her for a long moment. He clearly wasn't happy that she had spoken up at all, but her capitulation seemed to satisfy him somewhat. He adjusted the cuff of his shirt, regaining some of his icy composure. "Very well," he said coolly. Adrien didn't immediately move from her side. He looked down at Ayla, concern flickering in his gaze. "Are you sure?" he asked, so softly it was almost a whisper meant only for her. The genuine care in his tone almost unraveled her. Ayla managed a tiny nod. "I'm sure," she whispered back, though in truth she was anything but. Still, with Adrien watching her like that, she felt a little stronger. Finally, Adrien inclined his head and stepped back, allowing her a bit of space. He pulled out her chair for her with unexpected gentleness. Ayla sat, because refusing at this point would only prolong the scene. Adrien returned to his seat as well, moving with that same contained grace, but the atmosphere was forever changed. Caleb cleared his throat, a brittle sound. "Now where were we?" he said as he lowered himself into his chair. "Ah, yes, the proposal." He snapped his fingers at one of the hovering attendants. "Open the Merlot." Then, to Adrien, in a tone of forced normalcy, "A glass of wine, Mr. Vescari?" 1985. Bordeaux, a fine year. Ayla numbly allowed a servant to pour a splash of burgundy liquid into her own glass, even though she rarely drank. Anything to occupy her trembling hands. As the wine was poured and small courtesies exchanged, Ayla could feel her father pointedly ignoring her presence now, as if she were truly just part of the furniture. Fine by her. Her outburst had been small, but it was the first true defiance she'd shown in a long time. She should have been terrified of how he'd make her pay for it later, and she was. But a part of her secretly relished that she'd said it. "I'm not your decoration." She had asserted a shred of selfhood, however tiny. The meal resumed in uneasy silence for a few minutes. Caleb steered the conversation swiftly back to business, outlining some plan involving trade routes and partnerships that went over Ayla's head. She barely listened, too aware of the tension coiling tight in her shoulders and the glances Adrien kept casting her way. Finally, dessert arrived, though no one seemed to have an appetite. and Caleb signaled for the servants to leave the wine bottle and give them privacy. Once the staff had withdrawn, closing the doors behind them, her father folded his hands and smiled at Adrien. It was the shark-like smile he wore when about to strike a deal. "Mr. Viscari," he began, "I appreciate your patience this evening. I think now is a good time to discuss the real reason I invited you here." He pulled a slim leather folder from beside his place setting and set it on the table between them. Ayla eyed the folder, a sense of foreboding creeping up her spine. What new scheme was this? Caleb patted the folder. "This," he said, glancing at Ayla with a carefully bland expression, "is a proposed partnership contract between our family's enterprises and your organization. Mr. Viscari." Adrien's eyebrows lifted slightly. He didn't reach for the folder yet. "A partnership? I wasn't aware that was on the menu tonight." Her father chuckled. "I apologize for the secrecy. Delicate matters of business sometimes proceed more smoothly once personal rapport is established. Hence the dinner." Ayla had been holding her breath. The whole evening suddenly clicked into place. Her father wasn't trying to sell her to some perverted politician. He was trying to broker a partnership with Adrien Viscari's syndicate. And he'd used her presence as window dressing to make Caleb seem like a family man, a trustworthy friend, not a rival or a threat. The relief that she wasn't being promised as some bride or plaything was short-lived, drowned by the humiliation that she'd just been used as a pawn in another of Caleb's schemes. Adrien set the pages he'd skimmed back down slowly. "It's an interesting proposal," he said. "But I wonder, why seek this alliance now, Mr. Hart?" Caleb's smile stayed fixed. "Times change, Mr. Vescari. The world is unpredictable. I believe in strengthening ties whenever opportunities arise." Adrien's expression remained polite, though Ayla sensed his skepticism. He nodded slowly. "I appreciate the sentiment of preparedness. In principle, I'm not opposed to cooperation." Caleb's shoulders seemed to relax a fraction in relief. "However," Adrien continued, placing the contract pages neatly back into the folder, "I'd like to review these terms in detail with my legal counsel before signing anything. Surely you understand." "Of course," Caleb conceded, though Ayla noticed a flash of impatience in his eyes. He forced a smile and pulled a smaller stack of papers from the folder, along with a fountain pen. "In that case, while you review those documents, perhaps we can formalize a simpler matter tonight as a gesture of good faith." He slid the new document across the table toward Ayla. "This is a standard PR agreement for Ayla regarding the foundation. It just ensures we're all on the same page moving forward." Ayla felt a ripple of foreboding as she looked down at the pages suddenly placed before her. Caleb's tone was mild, but she knew him too well. This was no harmless formality. Richard Hale, the family lawyer, stepped forward and placed the folder and papers properly in front of Ayla's empty dessert plate. He gave her a sympathetic half-smile, but she knew better. Richard was her father's creature through and through. "Ayla," Caleb said, in an almost gentle tone that set her nerves on edge, "these are the updated documents for the Hart Family Foundation's Public Relations Charter. We've made some revisions that require your signature as the acting spokesperson and a board member." Ayla blinked, taken aback. "Revisions? Now?" Her voice sounded small. "Father, can't this wait until after?" Caleb cut her off, still smiling that tight smile. "It will only take a moment. Richard will show you where to sign." He tapped the top page and offered the fancy pen. Ayla's heart thumped erratically. This was unusual. Her father rarely involved her in paperwork unless absolutely necessary, and never spontaneously in front of a guest. Why the sudden urgency? She scanned the first lines, but the text swam in her anxious vision. Terms like representation, moral turpitude clause, and extended guardianship jumped out at her in a blur. Her mouth went dry. Extended guardianship? Her father cleared his throat. "Just formalities, dear. We discussed adjusting the foundation's structure for better oversight. Remember?" She certainly did not. That sounded like something she would remember. Isla looked up at Richard Hale for help. What is all this exactly? Richard gave a rehearsed explanation smoothly. Nothing to worry about. It's essentially renewing your commitment to act in the best interest of the Foundation and allowing your father to manage its activities on your behalf. Standard practice, given your busy schedule. Busy schedule? She nearly scoffed. He meant given your fragile state, though he wouldn't say it out loud. Ayla swallowed, feeling cornered. Her eyes darted to her father. Caleb watched her like a hawk, the patience in his expression wearing thin. Adrien's voice came quietly from across the table, startling both her and Richard. What happens if she doesn't sign? All eyes turned to Adrien. He sat back in his chair, arms crossed, gaze laser-focused on the documents in front of Ayla. Caleb answered with a casual wave of his hand. It really isn't optional. Without these signatures, the Foundation's activities might be hindered by legal technicalities. We'd hate to lose momentum on our good work. He looked at Ayla again, heavy with meaning. We all want to keep Mother's clinic funded, don't we? Ayla's blood ran cold. There it was, the velvet threat under the pretty wrapping. Her mother's medical care, the small charity clinic in her mother's name that the Foundation supported. Those were lifelines her father controlled absolutely. If Ayla refused to sign, he could withdraw that support on a whim. Her hands trembled as she took the pen. She felt sick. The trap was obvious now. This charter likely contained clauses that would give her father even more control, perhaps even legal authority over her decisions, under the guise of protecting the Foundation's image. Guardianship. Would it declare her incompetent to run her own trust or life? The thought made her dizzy. She glanced helplessly at Adrien. To her surprise, his face reflected open concern and simmering anger at the scene unfolding. He might not know all the details, but he clearly recognized coercion when he saw it. Ayla lowered her eyes to the document. Richard pointed to a line at the bottom of the page. One signature here, and initial the next page, he murmured. Her father said softly, Go on, Ayla. It's for the family. For your mother. Her vision blurred. Her mother, fragile and ailing in that care home, depended on the Heart Foundation's funds for the best treatment. If Caleb pulled the plug... Ayla clenched her teeth. She loathed that he could still do this to her, twist her arm with guilt and fear. With a deep, shuddering breath, she put pen to paper, the tip hovering just above the signature line. She hesitated. This felt like signing away her soul. Her eyes burned with angry tears threatening to spill. No, I have to do this. For Mom. Her hand began to move, pen touching the paper, when another hand appeared, gently pressing down on the document, blocking her from signing. Ayla looked up in astonishment. Adrien had risen from his seat and closed the distance without her even noticing. Now he stood beside her, one strong, long-fingered hand pinning the papers to the table. His touch was firm but careful, not crumpling the paper, simply holding it in place. The gold nib of the pen in Ayla's grip made a tiny black blot where it had been about to write, now arrested mid-stroke. Caleb shot to his feet, disbelief and fury contorting his features. What is the meaning of this? He snapped. Adrien's expression could have been carved from ice. He looked directly at Caleb, and when he spoke, his voice was dangerously calm. She doesn't sign anything you touch. It was not a loud statement, but it hit the room like a thunderclap. The security guard by the door stepped forward instinctively, and Richard Hale's eyes went wide as saucers. Ayla herself could only stare at Adrien, heart hammering. The protective authority in his stance and tone left her breathless. Caleb's face flushed red. Mr. Viscari, he said in a low, threatening voice. This is a private family matter. I suggest you remove your hand and allow my daughter to do what she must. Ayla felt Adrien shift slightly beside her. He didn't remove his hand. Instead, he angled himself more fully between Ayla and her father, as if to shield her. His eyes never left Caleb's. Forcing her signature under duress makes whatever she signs worthless, Adrien said. Surely you know that. There's no need for all this pressure. Caleb's fists clenched at his sides. Ayla could see him struggling to maintain composure. There is no duress. Ayla is simply honoring her responsibilities. Aren't you, dear? His last words were a razor-edged prompt. Ayla opened her mouth, but Adrien spoke over her, voice hardening. It looks like duress from where I stand, and I won't allow it. For a moment, Ayla feared her father might actually lunge across the table at Adrien. She had never seen Caleb so enraged yet, so reined in. His eyes were cold as steel. You're jeopardizing a very promising alliance, Mr. Viscari, he warned. Perhaps you should consider how valuable my goodwill is before interfering in family affairs. Adrien's lip curved in something that was not a smile. An alliance based on harming your own flesh and blood? That's not a partnership I'm eager to join, Mr. Hart. A trembling silence fell. Ayla's heart was in her throat. Part of her thrilled at Adrien's words, but another part feared what retaliation they might provoke. Caleb's eyes flicked to Ayla, and the hatred in them at that moment was unmistakable. Ayla felt her blood go cold. She had never wanted to disgrace him in front of an outsider, but Adrien's intervention had done just that. Perhaps, Caleb said at length, each syllable biting. We all need to cool our heads. It's late. We can reconvene when tempers are settled. It was a retreat in thin disguise. Caleb carefully gathered the scattered papers, his movements stiff with anger. To Richard, he snapped, "Put these away." Richard hurried to comply, shuffling the unsigned documents back into the leather folder. Caleb inhaled slowly, nostrils flared, then addressed Adrien with forced civility. Mr. Viscari, I will have my driver take you back to your hotel. We can discuss business another time, under calmer circumstances. It was Adrien watched Caleb for a long moment, then inclined his head slightly. As you wish. He turned to Ayla, his gaze softening by a degree. Good night, Ayla. She realized this might be the last she'd see of him. If her father had his way, certainly it would be. Panic and desperation welled up. She wanted to say something, anything to make him stay or to thank him, but her throat felt locked. Good night, she whispered, her voice almost lost in the vast room. Adrien's jaw tightened as if holding back words. With one last steely glance at Caleb, he strode out. His footsteps echoed as the guard at the door moved aside to let him pass. Ayla stood there frozen, feeling both rescued and doomed. Because as soon as Adrien's figure disappeared through the doors, she knew she would pay dearly for what had just happened. The doors shut behind him, and an oppressive silence fell. Caleb glared at her, his voice deadly quiet. Do you have any idea what you've just done? He hissed. You ungrateful, stupid girl. I invited him here for your benefit as much as mine, and you make me look like a fool. He advanced a step, and Ayla scrambled back, heart hammering. Mark my words, Caleb said, enunciating each threat with quiet fury. You will regret tonight. That contract will be signed one way or another. And as for Mr. Vescari, he nearly spat the name. If you harbor any foolish fantasies, erase them. Men like him don't save broken little girls out of love. He was just salvaging a business arrangement. Each cruel word cut Ayla to the bone, but she refused to crumble in front of him. Her silence only seemed to enrage Caleb further. His lips curled in disgust. Go to your room, he ordered through clenched teeth. I'll deal with you in the morning, and don't think of contacting your mother. Her care, he gave a chilling smile, depends entirely on my goodwill now. That final threat drained the blood from Ayla's face. A sob caught in her throat as she turned and fled, bolting out of the dining hall and up the staircase toward her room. Only once she was behind the safety of her locked bedroom door did Ayla collapse onto the floor, shaking with silent tears. Fear for her mother and for herself crept in like a cold tide. Yet amid the despair, one thing burned bright. Adrien had stood up to her father. Someone had finally fought for her. Clinging to that small spark of hope, Ayla forced herself to breathe. The night was dark, but she was not as alone as she'd once thought. Ayla sat curled on the rug by her bed, hugging her knees to her chest. The house had gone still and dark, but she couldn't stop shaking. After crying until her throat was raw, she had gone numb. Her bedroom door was locked. She'd heard the click when her father's security guard pulled it shut, effectively making her a prisoner for the night. Through the crack beneath the door, she could see the hall light and the shadow of feet stationed outside. There would be no slipping out. She flinched at every creak of the old house, heart in her throat, terrified Caleb might burst in to continue his tirade, or, worse, to carry out his threats. But the hours crept by, and no one came. Perhaps he meant what he said. He'd deal with her in the morning. That left her stranded in dread of what form that punishment would take. Ayla wiped her swollen eyes with the back of her hand. On her nightstand, her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her in the silent room. She had forgotten it was even there. Scrambling up, she snatched it, fearful the sound would alert the guard. The screen glowed with a text from an unknown number. "Are you okay?" Her breath caught. "Who?" Another text bubble appeared. "It's Adrien. Please answer." Ayla's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Adrien. How did he get her number? Probably from a business contact or her father's files. The real question was, why was he reaching out after what happened? She swallowed hard and typed with shaky fingers, I'm fine." It was a reflexive lie, and he probably knew it. Almost immediately, the phone buzzed again. "I know you're not. I'm outside. Let me help you." Outside? Ayla's heart thumped wildly. She crept to her window, carefully peeling back the curtain. Down below, beyond the manicured lawn and the iron gates at the perimeter, she spotted the faint outline of a black car idling just outside the property line. It was hard to see, but the headlights were off, and she could make out a lone figure leaning against the side of the car, looking up toward the house. Her pulse jumped. Adrien. What was he doing? If her father's men saw him... Her phone buzzed once more. "I can get you out. But it has to be now. Do you want to leave?" Ayla's mind raced. Leave? Now? The thought was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. If she left with Adrien, she'd be defying her father in the most irrevocable way yet. He would consider it a betrayal of the family. He might retaliate, cut off her mother's care, or worse. But if she stayed, he would force that contract or lock her away or use her until there was nothing left. Through the thin curtain, Ayla allowed herself to look again at Adrien's dark silhouette by the car. He was risking being here. If Caleb caught wind of it, it could spark all-out war. But he'd come anyway, for her. Her phone glowed with another message. "I promise you'll be safe with me. You don't deserve this, Ayla. Let me help." Tears pricked her eyes again. How could she trust him, really? He had once promised to be there for her, too, and then he vanished. Or so she'd thought. But tonight he had stood up for her, protected her in a way no one ever had. A chance at freedom, a small voice in her head whispered, even if temporary. Before she could overthink it, Ayla typed back, "Yes, please." The reply was immediate. "Under your window in 2 minutes. Be ready." She jumped to her feet, adrenaline surging. Under her window? They were on the second floor. As she peered down, she saw Adrien move with swift purpose, speaking into something, perhaps a mic at his cuff. From the car, 2 figures emerged. His bodyguards. They approached the fence line. Suddenly, a light near the rear of the house flared, followed by a pop and sizzle. Ayla realized it was the power box. Sparks flew as one of Adrien's men expertly tampered with it. The estate lights flickered and died. The entire property plunged into darkness. She heard the distant shout of a guard surprised by the blackout. Ayla's guard outside her door cursed and moved off, presumably to investigate or call in the outage. Her door remained locked, but now was her chance if ever. Working quickly, Ayla grabbed her purse and stuffed her phone, a few essentials, and the small stash of emergency cash she kept hidden in a shoe into it. She shrugged on a light cardigan over her ugly dress. It was still all she wore, but at this point she didn't care how she looked. She tried her door gently, definitely locked. Her eyes went to the window. Adrien said, "Under your window." Did he expect her to climb down? As if in answer, she saw a dark rope unfurl silently from above, down past her window, followed by a slight tap at the glass. Ayla bit back a gasp as the rope swayed, carrying with it a grappling hook that had secured onto something on the roof or balcony above her. She slid open her window as quietly as she could. A figure suddenly swung into view from the side, one of Adrien's guards, hanging on the rope. He placed a suction handle on the sill and grabbed it, bracing himself. "Miss Hart," he whispered, extending a gloved hand to her. "Mr. Viscari sent me. We have to move quickly." Her heart in her throat, Ayla nodded and clutched her purse strap across her body. She gripped the man's hand, and together they maneuvered her out of the window. The night air was cold on her flushed face as she clung to him. In a practiced motion, the guard secured her to a harness clip on the rope. "Hold on tight," he murmured. Moments later, they descended in a controlled slide. Ayla held her breath as her stockinged feet left the ledge. It was only a short drop, maybe 10 feet to a lower patio roof, but it felt like flying. They landed with a soft thump on the grass. Her knees wobbled as the guard unfastened the harness, steadying her gently. "This way," he urged, guiding her swiftly across the dark lawn. The house was in chaos behind them. She could hear shouts of confused security, a flashlight slicing through the darkness where the outdoor lights had failed. They hadn't yet realized she was gone. Ahead, by the back gate that now stood ajar, courtesy of Adrien's other guard, she saw Adrien waiting for her. The faint moonlight outlined his tall frame. The moment Ayla slipped through the gate, Adrien's arms were there, supporting her by the elbow. "Are you hurt?" he asked in a low, urgent tone. She shook her head, breathless. "No, I'm okay." Relief flooded his eyes. Adrien nodded to his men. One slipped away into the night, likely to cover their tracks. The other jogged ahead to the idling car. "This way," Adrien said softly. He led her to the car, a sleek black Mercedes, and opened the rear door for her. Ayla hesitated only a second before ducking inside. Adrien followed, not closing the door until the first guard returned and gave a quiet, "All clear, sir." As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving her father's estate behind in darkness and disarray, Ayla felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. She'd done it. She'd actually escaped. At least for now. In the dimly lit back seat, Adrien sat a careful distance from her. The privacy partition was up, granting them a semblance of seclusion from the driver and guard in front. They rode in silence for a minute. Ayla realized she was shaking. Whether from cold or adrenaline, she wasn't sure. Possibly both. She clutched her purse on her lap like a lifeline. Adrien shrugged off his suit jacket and gently draped it around her shoulders. The gesture was unexpectedly tender. "You're safe now," he said quietly. Safe. Ayla hadn't felt safe in a long time. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. It felt inadequate, but she didn't have better words yet. Adrien nodded, his gaze searching her face in the semi-dark. She was acutely aware of how close they were in the confines of the car. Despite everything, and the warmth of him next to her and the faint, familiar scent of his cologne eased some of her shaking. After another moment of charged quiet, he spoke. "I'm taking you to a secure place, one of my properties. You'll have your own room, with a lock. No one will enter without your permission. You have my word." Ayla looked at him, surprised by the specificity of his promise. There was a firmness in his tone. He wanted her to know this wasn't an abduction or an exchange of one gilded cage for another. "You can keep your phone," Adrien continued, "and call or leave whenever you wish. I won't stop you. My goal is to keep you safe from your father's reach while we figure out how to handle this." "How to handle this?" Ayla echoed quietly. It dawned on her that she had truly left her father's control, and a massive uncertainty lay before her. "He'll never let me go," she murmured. "Not really." Adrien's jaw tightened. "He will have to. I won't let him hurt you again." The conviction in his voice made her chest constrict. He sounded so sure, so capable. But Ayla remembered too well the pain that had festered for years. She had dreamed of him saying words like that once, back when she'd believed they would face the world together, but that dream had ended in heartbreak and betrayal. And despite tonight's heroics, that wound wasn't healed. She drew in a shaky breath. "Adrien, I need to make something clear." He shifted toward her, attentively, as if bracing for what she'd say. "Of course. Anything." Ayla pulled the jacket a little tighter around herself, steeling her courage. "Thank you for rescuing me, truly. But don't mistake this." She gestured between them. "Don't mistake my decision to come with you for forgiveness." In the low light, she saw his eyes flicker with emotion. Hurt, perhaps, but she needed to set this boundary. "I haven't forgotten what happened. You broke me, Adrien. And I'm only here right now because I can't survive under my father anymore. And this is survival, not," her voice trembled, "not some reunion." Her words hung in the air, harsh but honest. She needed that line drawn, for her own heart's sake. Adrien inclined his head, accepting her terms without argument. If her words wounded him, he masked it behind a solemn understanding. "Good," he said quietly. "I don't need your forgiveness tonight, Ayla." He paused, his gaze never leaving hers as the city lights streaked across his face through the window. "I just need you alive." They drove through the city until the streets grew quieter and the homes larger. Eventually, the car turned through a gated driveway and stopped in front of a modern, secluded house tucked behind high walls. It wasn't ostentatious like her father's mansion, but it exuded security and privacy. Ayla followed Adrien inside, staying a step behind. One of his men had gone ahead to turn on lights, illuminating a spacious living area with sleek furnishings. Despite her turmoil, Ayla couldn't help noting the contrast. Where her father's home was cold marble and antiques, this place felt warmer, more lived in, with soft lamps and dark wood floors. Adrien paused in the foyer and turned to her. "This is one of my safe houses," he explained gently. "Few people know of it. You can rest here as long as you need." She clutched the lapels of his jacket still around her shoulders, suddenly self-conscious. The adrenaline of the escape was ebbing, leaving exhaustion and awkwardness in its wake. "Thank you," she said again quietly. A middle-aged woman in a crisp blouse appeared from a side hallway, perhaps a housekeeper or staff member. She gave Adrien a respectful nod, then smiled kindly at Ayla. "This is Sophia," Adrien introduced. "She helps keep the place running. If you need anything, day or night, she'll assist you." Sophia stepped forward. "Miss Hart, can I get you something? Tea? A warm meal?" Her voice had a soothing, motherly quality. Ayla realized she hadn't eaten more than a few bites at dinner, yet her stomach was too knotted to feel hunger. Maybe just some water," she managed. As Sophia disappeared to fetch it, Adrien gestured down a hallway. "Your room is this way. I hope you'll be comfortable." He led her to a door at the far end of the hall. Pushing it open revealed a large bedroom suite. Neutral-toned walls, a plush queen bed with a navy comforter, and an adjacent private bathroom. It was understated and comfortable, far more inviting than her luxurious but stifling room at home. Isla took a tentative step inside. Adrien remained at the threshold, keeping a respectful distance. "There are fresh linens and clothes." He motioned to the foot of the bed, where Ayla now noticed a neatly folded pile of women's clothing. Soft sweatpants, t-shirts, even new undergarments with store tags attached. He must have arranged these on their way here. The thoughtfulness of that gesture left her momentarily speechless. "I guessed at sizes," he said almost shyly when she didn't speak. "If something doesn't fit, we'll get what you need." It was too much kindness. Ayla blinked rapidly, afraid she'd cry again. She had lived so long in an environment where every favor had strings, every kindness a hidden barb. This open concern felt alien. Thank you," she whispered, meaning it. Sophia returned with a glass of water and also a steaming mug. "Chamomile tea with a drop of honey," she said, pressing the mug into Ayla's hands. "It will help calm your nerves, dear." Ayla accepted it, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. "Thank you, Sophia." The older woman nodded and excused herself discreetly. Adrien cleared his throat softly. "I'll let you settle in. My room is just down the hall if you need anything. 2 of my men are outside the house for security, but they won't disturb you." Ayla nodded. As he started to pull the door closed, a small flash of panic went through her. "Wait," she blurted, her voice sharper than intended. Adrien immediately paused, concern flickering over his face. "Yes?" Ayla forced herself to breathe. The panic was irrational. She was safe here. But something about a man closing a door on her in a strange house triggered a jolt of fear. "Could you leave it open just a bit?" she asked in a strained voice. How to explain that after the night she'd had, the idea of any closed door felt suffocating. Realization dawned in Adrien's eyes. He nodded without hesitation. "Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable." He left the door ajar, a foot of space open. Isla managed a faint smile of gratitude, embarrassed by her own skittishness. Quietly, she added, "I'm sorry. I just might need time to adjust." "You have nothing to apologize for," Adrien said gently. "Consent is law here, Ayla. You say how you want things, and that's how they'll be. Always. Consent is law here." The words were like balm on a wound she hadn't fully realized was there. Ayla had grown so used to having no say in anything that being told her comfort was a priority felt almost unreal. "Good night," he said softly. "Try to get some rest." When he left, true to his word, he didn't fully shut the door. Isla stood in the quiet of the guest room, the distant muffled voices of Adrien and his men the only sounds in the house. She sipped the chamomile tea, letting its warmth travel through her. Slowly, her pounding heart began to steady. After a moment, she set the mug down and changed out of her wrinkled dress into the clean cotton t-shirt and drawstring sleep pants Adrien had provided. They fit well enough. The simple clothes felt like freedom. A far cry from the tight, formal attire her father always insisted on. In the bathroom, she splashed water on her face. The mirror reflected a pale, tired young woman with red-rimmed eyes. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something else there too. A spark of relief, maybe, or hope. Ayla barely recognized that feeling. Back in the bedroom, she found her purse on the bed where she'd dropped it. Her phone was inside. Hesitantly, she took it out and saw several missed calls from a blocked number, undoubtedly her father. A shiver went through her. Not tonight. She powered the phone off. As she set it aside, She noticed something on the nightstand that hadn't been there before. A manila file folder with her name written on it. Curious, Ayla sat on the bed and pulled it into her lap. Inside, she found a handful of papers and photographs. Frowning, she held them up to the soft lamplight. The first photo made her inhale sharply. It was of her, about 2 years ago, exiting a university building downtown. She remembered that day. It had been pouring rain, and she was hugging a textbook to her chest, hurrying to catch a bus. Why did Adrien have this? She shuffled through more pages. A hospital bill in her name from 3 years ago, when she'd spent a week in a clinic after an emotional breakdown. Something she thought her father had kept quiet. A newspaper clipping about the Heart Foundation's clinic opening. A security log from the assisted living center where her mother stayed. It dawned on her that these were all pieces of her life from the years after Adrien had gone. He had collected information about her. Her hands trembled as she picked up the last item, a printed screenshot of a text message exchange. Ayla leaned closer to read it. The top of the image showed a message sent from Adrien's old number, dated years back. It read, "I'll be there at midnight. Run away with me, Ayla. We can be free of all of this. Please." Ayla's heart started hammering. Adrien had sent that to her? At midnight? That night, all those years ago, when everything fell apart. She never saw this message. It never reached her phone. Below his message was a reply, ostensibly from her, sent an hour later. "You were a mistake. Stay away from me. Don't ever contact me again." Ayla's blood ran ice cold. She never wrote those words. She would never, ever have said that to Adrien. A mistake? The love of her life? A mistake? Her vision blurred as she realized what this meant. Her father. He must have intercepted Adrien's plea and crafted this cruel reply to drive him away. Ayla could practically see Caleb's hand in the formal, emotionless wording. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of anger and fierce, vindicated sorrow. All these years, she had believed Adrien tossed her aside, when in truth, he had tried to save her, and she'd been cruelly kept in the dark. No wonder Adrien had looked at her with such hurt tonight. He thought those hateful words came from her, and she had believed his silence meant he'd never cared. A small sob escaped her lips, but it was mixed with something almost like relief. The lie that had poisoned them was unraveling at last. Ayla pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling her cries so as not to alarm anyone. On the bottom of the printout, a handwritten note in the margin stood out. Adrien's bold, slanted scrawl. "Not her. Find source." He knew, or at least he suspected. He had doubted that her rejection was genuine. The fact warmed her soul in a way she couldn't describe. Adrien hadn't wanted to believe she would so callously cut him off, and he'd even set someone to investigate it. Ayla carefully returned the papers to the folder, her mind racing and heart aching. Her father had done this. To both of them. Stolen their chance at happiness and filled the void with years of pain. Fresh determination steeled inside her. This changed everything. The man in the next room, the one who had risked himself to protect her tonight, was not the villain she'd thought him to be. The real villain was the one she'd been living under the thumb of all along. Wiping her tears, Ayla stood. She suddenly needed to speak to Adrien, to confirm what she'd just read, to hear his side of that terrible night. She needed the truth, all of it. Clutching the file to her chest, Ayla stepped into the hallway. The soft murmur of a television came from a room down the hall, likely Adrien's, where he might still be awake. She approached slowly, heart in her throat. Standing outside his partly open door, Ayla gathered her courage. The file in her hand felt heavy with revelations. She rapped her knuckles gently against the doorframe. "Adrien? Are you still awake? I need to talk to you." Her voice was soft but clear in the silent house. There was a pause. Then the TV was clicked off. Adrien appeared in the doorway, now wearing a black t-shirt instead of his dress shirt, and trousers. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running a hand through it restlessly. Concern etched his features instantly when he saw her face and the folder clutched tightly in her arms. Ayla. He said her name like a promise, like it was precious. Of course, come in. She entered the room, an office it seemed, converted into a den with a couch and a TV. Adrien gently closed the door to just a hand's width ajar behind her. They sat side by side on the couch, and only then did Ayla realize she was quivering. Wordlessly, she handed him the folder. Adrien opened it, scanning the contents he clearly already knew. When he reached the printed text messages, Ayla couldn't hold back anymore. "You tried to run away with me," she whispered, voice trembling. "I never got that message, and I never sent that reply." Adrien set the folder aside on the coffee table. "I know," he said, voice low and taut with emotion. "Not at first. For a long time, I thought you really wrote those words, but it never made sense in my heart. So a couple years ago, I dug. My tech guy traced metadata, found anomalies. It was sent from your number, but the phrasing, I knew it wasn't you. I suspected your father, or someone working for him, interfered." Ayla let out a shaky breath, a mix of relief and residual hurt. He did. He admitted years later that he'd do anything to keep me on the right path. She wiped a tear that escaped. All this time, we were apart because of him. Adrien closed his eyes, as if mastering a swell of anger. "I should have fought harder, confronted you in person. But when I got that message, I was devastated. And my father had just died. I was suddenly thrust into leading the Viscari family. I convinced myself you truly wanted nothing to do with me, that I was protecting you by staying away." He opened his eyes again, and they were shining with regret. "Leaving you was the worst mistake of my life, Ayla." Ayla's heart ached at the raw sincerity in his voice. Unthinking, she reached out and took his hand in hers. "It wasn't your fault. It wasn't mine either. It was him." Adrien laced his fingers with hers. They were both quiet for a moment, absorbing the enormity of what had been stolen from them. Finally, Ayla spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "I was so afraid to see you again. I wore the worst dress I had because I loved you too much to survive losing you twice." The confession hung in the air, raw and electric. Adrien's eyes widened, and a harsh breath escaped him as if her words had struck straight through his soul. "Ayla." Before she could blink, he cupped her face in his hands and brought his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, as though he feared she might break. But Ayla responded with all the pent-up yearning, hurt, and love swirling inside her. She clutched the front of his t-shirt, rising onto her knees on the couch to press closer. Adrien's hand slipped into her hair, holding her to him as he deepened the kiss with a desperate, tender intensity. It felt like coming home after... "I won't lose you again," he murmured fervently. "I swear it." Ayla closed her eyes, absorbing the promise. Despite everything, some wounded part of her heart was finally starting to mend in his presence. "I missed you so much," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms, and she curled against his chest. For a long moment, they simply held each other in the quiet room, her head tucked under his chin as he rubbed soothing circles on her back. His heart thudded under her ear, strong and steady. After a while, Adrien pressed a kiss to her temple. "You should try to sleep," he said softly. "You've been through hell tonight." Ayla looked up at him, reluctant to let go even for a second. But exhaustion was catching up with her, and she knew the next days would demand strength. "Will you stay?" she asked hesitantly. Just until I fall asleep?" His answer was to gently lift her into his arms. Isla let out a little gasp, but didn't protest as he carried her down the hall to her room. He laid her on the bed as if she were something precious, and pulled the blankets over her. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand in his. The lamp cast a warm glow, and in it she saw how tired he was too. Tired, but relieved. Sophia had left a small nightlight on. With the bedroom door still ajar, Ayla felt safe. "Get some rest," Adrien murmured, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Ayla's eyes were already closing. It felt natural and right that he was the last thing she saw as she drifted off, a silent guardian in the night. He stayed until her breathing evened out, and the tension left her brow. Though, only then did he allow himself to slip away and settle in the armchair in the living room to snatch a few hours of light sleep, keeping vigil just in case nightmares or a vengeful father came knocking. Morning light found Ayla and Adrien preparing for what they both knew was a trap, but one they intended to spring on their own terms. Morelli's midnight message had demanded Ayla as the price for her mother's life and Caleb's sins. After a tense early morning discussion, Ayla insisted she would not hide while her mother was in danger. Adrien, unwilling to put her at risk, but seeing no alternative, finally agreed to a plan that put her at the center, under carefully controlled conditions. By noon, Ayla stood in an abandoned riverside warehouse, the designated meeting point Morelli had given through a burner phone call. Sunlight slanted in dusty beams through broken windows. The air smelled of rust and river algae. Ayla's heart pounded, but she steadied herself with the knowledge that Adrien and his people were positioned covertly all around. A tiny earpiece kept her in contact, and a slim push-button alarm rested in her palm, ready to signal them if needed. Her mother was there, seated in a wheelchair near the center of the warehouse, looking frail and confused, but thankfully unharmed. Beside her stood Lorenzo Morelli, a tall, lean man in an impeccable suit that contrasted with the grim surroundings. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, and a thin smile played on his lips as he regarded Ayla. Nearby, 2 burly henchmen cradled rifles, and a few paces behind Morelli lingered Caleb Hart and Richard Hale, both looking worse for wear. Caleb's face was drawn, sweat beading on his brow. Richard hovered nervously, a bruise darkening his temple, likely from rough handling by Morelli's thugs after the failed gala attack. "Ayla," Caleb breathed when he saw her, relief and dread mingling in his eyes. He looked utterly desperate. He'd been frantic enough to let Morelli use her mother as bait. The sight sickened Ayla, but she kept her focus. "Dad," she replied coldly, then acknowledged Richard with an equally frigid glance. "Mr. Hale." Richard avoided her eyes entirely, shame flickering across his face before he looked down. Morelli stepped forward, one hand resting almost casually on the handle of Ayla's mother's wheelchair. Her mother looked up at him with frightened, confused eyes, then over at Ayla. "Ayla, what's happening?" Her mother quavered, her voice thin. "It's okay, Mom," Ayla called gently, forcing calm into her tone, even as rage and fear warred within her. "I'm here, and so am I," Morelli interjected, voice oily with satisfaction. "What a touching family reunion. Almost." He nodded to one of his men, who promptly rolled Ayla's mother further back, out of immediate reach. Ayla's blood ran cold seeing her mother wheeled away, but she kept her voice steady. "You have me here, Morelli," she said. "Let my mother go, and I'll do whatever you want." Morelli tutted lightly, strolling a few steps closer to Ayla while maintaining a safe distance. "What I want, my dear, is very simple. I want what I've always wanted. Leverage. Control." His gaze flicked toward Caleb. "Your father, unfortunately, proved disappointing on that front. His value is rapidly diminishing." Caleb blanched, opening his mouth to protest, but Morelli silenced him with a glare. "So now," Morelli continued, turning back to Ayla, "I think perhaps you will be a more useful bargaining chip. A Viscari heirloom of sorts, He chuckled as if he'd made a clever joke. Ayla's pulse raced. She realized his plan: use her to control Adrien. Morelli must have deduced from the gala that Adrien's protective behavior meant she was his weakness. Through the earpiece, Adrien's voice came in a soft whisper only she could hear. Keep him talking. Almost in position. Ayla gave the barest nod and steeled herself. Leverage over Adrien, you mean? Morelli's grin widened. Clever girl, yes. The mighty Adrien Vescari, brought to heel if I hold the one thing he cares about. She swallowed, suppressing a shiver at being referred to as a thing. And my father, where does he fit in now? At that, Caleb finally snarled, unable to remain quiet. I'm the one who brought her here. Morelli. I delivered. Morelli whirled on him with a scowl. You? He sneered. You botched things spectacularly. Instead of quietly handing me Vescari, you created a public spectacle. The police are sniffing around your accounts, and our little stunt at the gala failed. You're a liability, Hart. He snapped his fingers. One of the henchmen stepped behind Caleb and jammed a gun against his ribs. Caleb sucked in a terrified breath, going rigid. Ayla felt a grim satisfaction seeing her father at Morelli's mercy. Still, she needed to keep them talking a bit longer. She addressed Caleb, her voice echoing off the metal beams. So that's it, father? You'd trade me and Mom to save yourself? Caleb dared a look at her, sweat on his brow, his face crumpling with something like guilt. I did it for the family, he croaked, desperation thick in his tone. We were in danger. Morelli would have destroyed us. I had no choice. Ayla had anticipated those words, had heard them before, but they still made her blood boil. She pulled her phone from her pocket and discreetly hit the record button. No choice? She repeated, voice dripping with bitterness. You always had a choice, and you chose yourself. Morelli rolled his eyes at their exchange. Enough of this melodrama, he declared, clearly growing impatient. He made a quick gesture with 2 fingers. One of the armed men started toward Ayla. Time's up, we'll be leaving now, Morelli said, almost jovially. Miss Hart, you'll be coming with me, don't worry. I'll take excellent care of you. Ayla's heart slammed against her ribs. Adrien's faint voice sounded in her ear. Now. Her thumb pressed the hidden alarm in her palm. In an instant, smoke canisters burst through the high windows with a series of crashes. They exploded on the ground, spewing thick plumes of gray fog. Morelli's men shouted in confusion, guns swinging upward. Adrien's team struck fast. Silhouettes moved in the haze, flashlights cutting the gloom, then the crack of suppressed gunfire and the thuds of bodies hitting concrete. One by one, Morelli's henchmen were subdued or disarmed under the onslaught of trained fighters. Richard Hale tried to slip away in the chaos, but 2 of Adrien's bodyguards intercepted him before he got far, tackling him to the ground. Caleb stumbled back, attempting to flee as well, and ran directly into a team of police officers flooding into the warehouse with guns drawn. They forced him face down on the floor and snapped cuffs around his wrists. Amid the turmoil, Ayla's eyes frantically sought her mother. She found her still in her wheelchair, us now near Morelli, who had drawn a pistol and grabbed the wheelchair's handles, clearly intending to use her mother as a shield. Through the smoky dimness, Adrien descended from a catwalk along with several of his men, rappelling down ropes. He landed a few yards from Ayla with the grace of a panther. Immediately, he launched himself at the thug who had been reaching for Ayla moments before. A swift, precise strike from Adrien's fist, and the man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Ayla coughed, waving acrid smoke from her face. The air was thick and hard to breathe, but the immediate threat of armed men was dwindling. 2 of Morelli's henchmen lay incapacitated. The last few shots rang out, and then silence except for the ringing in her ears. She squinted through the haze and saw a few of Adrien's operatives securing the perimeter. Police were shouting orders as they swept in behind Adrien's team. At the far end of the warehouse, Isla's mother's pale face loomed. Morelli was retreating, then pushing the wheelchair toward a side door. Ayla's stomach lurched. He was trying to take her mom. Adrien's eyes found Ayla in the chaos. She pointed frantically toward her mother and Morelli. "He has Mom," she cried out, voice hoarse. Adrien's gaze snapped to the sight of Morelli backing away with the trembling older woman in front of him. Adrien charged forward, closing the distance in long strides. "Stop right there," Morelli barked, pressing the muzzle of his pistol to the side of Ayla's mother's head. He dragged her wheelchair halfway behind a shipping crate, using it and her as cover. "That's far enough, Viscari," he snarled. Adrien halted, gun in hand trained steadily on Morelli, but finger off the trigger. Ayla edged closer behind Adrien, her heart in her throat as she saw her mother's terrified face wet with tears. "Let her go, Morelli," Adrien said, deadly calm despite the gun pointed at the woman he'd come to save. "There's no way out of here for you. Listen." Only then did Morelli seem to register the cacophony outside, the wail of sirens, the shouted commands of police establishing a perimeter. His plan had collapsed spectacularly. His chest heaved, eyes darting like a cornered animal. Snarling, Morelli tightened his arm around Ayla's mother's shoulders, making her whimper. "I walk out of here or she dies, Viscari," he shouted. "I'll do it." Time seemed to slow. Ayla stood a few paces behind Adrien, trembling, as she watched the scene. If Morelli even flinched, he could pull that trigger. She had to do something. Before Adrien could respond, Ayla stepped out from behind him, raising her hands. "Morelli, I'm here," she called, desperation giving her courage. "You want me, right? Let my mother go and I'll come with you. No fight." "Ayla, no," Adrien said sharply, his arm moving as if to shield her again. Morelli's eyes flickered. Ayla could see the calculations running behind them. Slowly, his thin lips curled into a malicious smile. "Tempting," he said. "But I think I'll keep both of you. The more leverage, the better, no?" He jerked the wheelchair again, making Ayla's mother cry out softly. Adrien's composure almost cracked. His voice gained an edge of panic. "Don't do this. Morelli, you can't win here. Use your head." Morelli only pressed the gun harder to Ayla's mother's temple. "Stay back!" he yelled at Adrien, who had dared a step forward alongside Ayla. "Both of you! On the ground now, or she dies." Ayla's mother closed her eyes, tears leaking out. Ayla felt a surge of ice-cold fear and absolute resolve. She met Adrien's gaze out of the corner of her eye. His was full of anguish, silently begging her not to comply. But he wasn't going to let her mother die either. Her mind raced. She noticed then a red laser dot wavering on Morelli's shoulder. One of the police snipers had him in their sights from a high window. But the angle was bad with her mother so close to him. Adrien carefully set his pistol on the ground and raised his hand slightly, stepping forward not toward Morelli, but toward Ayla's mother. "All right," he said soothingly. "I'm putting my weapon down. Just let the woman go, Lorenzo. You can have me if you want. I won't resist." He glanced briefly at Ayla, a warning in his eyes for her to stay put. "There's no need to hurt her." Morelli gave a harsh laugh, clearly not expecting that offer. "Touching, but you're not in a position to bargain, Viscari. Neither of you are." Ayla inched forward, trying not to draw Morelli's immediate ire. Behind him, through gaps in the warehouse walls, she could see tactical teams in dark gear fanning out, taking positions. The police were ready to end this. Morelli must have sensed it too. His face twisted with rage and desperation. "I'm walking out of here," he hissed. "If anyone tries to stop me, she's dead." He began edging toward the exit door, dragging the wheelchair awkwardly with one hand while keeping the gun pressed to Ayla's mother with the other. Ayla's mind latched onto something, a plan both stupid and brave. As Morelli shuffled back, his attention flickered to the door he was trying to navigate. In that split second, Ayla darted forward around Adrien and shoved a tall metal utility cart with all her might. The cart, left abandoned nearby, rolled into Morelli's path and clipped one of the wheelchair wheels. It wasn't enough to knock it over, but it jostled him, making him instinctively pull the gun for a split second away from her mother's head to steady himself. A loud crack echoed. The police sniper took the shot. Morelli yelled in pain as the bullet ripped through his shoulder, sending a spray of blood. His gun arm jerked upward, discharging a wild round into the ceiling. In that same instant, Adrien lunged forward with lightning speed. He slammed into Morelli, grappling the gun from his hand, and sending them both crashing to the concrete floor away from the wheelchair. Ayla rushed to her mother, yanking the wheelchair back from the fray and spinning it around. "Mom! Mom! Are you hurt?" Her mother looked dazed but uninjured. She burst into sobs of relief, reaching up to paw at Ayla's face and shoulders. "Ayla! Oh, thank God!" "It's okay," Ayla choked, tears of her own falling as she crouched and hugged her mother tightly. "I'm here. You're safe now." Behind them, Adrien pinned the bleeding Morelli face down and wrenched his arms behind his back. Morelli struggled weakly, curses turning into a pained cry as Adrien applied pressure to the bullet wound to keep him subdued. Within seconds, 2 officers swarmed in to take custody of the crime boss, cuffing him and dragging him away. Lorenzo Morelli was finished. All around, the warehouse was swarming with law enforcement and medics. Richard Hale was being hauled out by a pair of agents, head hanging. Caleb Hart, already in handcuffs, was being marched toward the exit by 2 officers. He was pale and oddly shrunken-looking, as if he'd lost some essential essence now that his schemes lay in ruins. As Caleb passed by Ayla and her mother, he stumbled, then paused. One officer tugged him to keep moving, but he strained, meeting Ayla's eyes. I did it for the family," he blurted, voice cracking. In that moment, he looked like a broken man clinging to a feeble excuse. "Ayla, please. I'm your father." Ayla felt her mother's frail hand squeeze hers at those words, as if in warning or entreaty. But Ayla had no empathy left for him. She rose to her feet, stepping forward to face Caleb one final time. "No," she said softly but firmly, cutting through his plea. "You did it so you could stay powerful." Caleb flinched as if she'd slapped him. For a second, his facade of defeat dropped, revealing raw anger and fear. Then the officers pulled him along, and he was gone, shuffled out into the daylight to face the public consequences of everything he had done. Behind him, paramedics were already tending to Ayla's mother and carefully guiding her wheelchair out to an ambulance. Her mother kept craning her neck to look back, eyes searching anxiously for Ayla. "Go with them, Mom," Ayla assured her, brushing her mother's hair back gently. "I'll be right behind you, I promise." Her mother nodded weakly, reaching out to touch Ayla's cheek one more time. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Ayla replied, voice thick. She kissed her mother's forehead before the paramedics wheeled her away toward safety. As soon as her mother was out of earshot, Ayla let out a shuddering breath. All the fear and tension of the confrontation began shaking loose in her bones. Adrien reached her in time to see her sway on her feet. He pulled her into his arms without a word. Ayla sank against him, letting his warmth and solidity ground her. For a long moment, they stood amid the remnants of chaos, broken glass, swirling dust, the distant chatter of officials, and all Ayla could think was, "We survived." She realized she was murmuring thanks over and over into Adrien's chest, fingers clutching his jacket. He gently stroked her hair, murmuring soothing words. When she finally drew back, Adrien kept his hands on her shoulders, scanning her as if to assure himself she was truly unharmed. His gaze lingered on a small bruise on her cheek, a remnant of being manhandled by one of Morelli's goons. The tenderness and worry in his eyes made her heart swell. "It's nothing," she whispered, covering his hand with hers. "I'm okay, Adrien." He exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. "I was so afraid for you," he admitted. "But you were incredible. Brave and—" His voice caught and he pulled her into another fierce hug. "And you're safe. That's what matters." Ayla held him just as tightly. Over his shoulder, she could see police officers securing Morelli into a squad car, and beyond that, the skyline of the city she'd thought she might never freely walk in again. Freedom. She closed her eyes and just breathed, allowing herself a moment to feel it. Soon, questions would need answering, statements given. But not just yet. Adrien eased back to look at her. With a gentle touch, he tilted her chin up. "Now that you're free," he began quietly. There was an uncharacteristic uncertainty in his expression, as if he were afraid to ask the next part. "Now that you're free, do you still want me?" The intensity of his question, the vulnerability in it, took Ayla's breath away. All the barriers between them had been broken, all the lies exposed. She realized that for the first time, they stood on truly equal ground. No contracts, no secrets, no parents pulling strings. Tears of a different kind filled her eyes as she gave him a tremulous smile. Ayla placed her palms on either side of his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble and the warmth of the man beneath. "Yes," she said, her voice clear in the echoing space. "Yes, Adrien. I want you. I always have." Relief and joy flickered across his face before he leaned down and kissed her. This kiss was soft and full of promise amidst the ruin and rubble. Ayla kissed him back with everything in her heart, heedless of the few onlookers. Let them see. She no longer had to hide the way she felt. They broke apart when a detective approached, clearing his throat politely. "Miss Hart, Mr. Viscari, we have a few questions, if you're up to it." Adrien kept an arm protectively around Ayla's waist as they nodded and followed the detective out of the warehouse. The midday sun was blinding after the dim interior, but it felt like stepping into a new life. Caleb was being loaded into a police van in handcuffs, cameras flashing from gathered press behind the barricades. Ayla watched dispassionately as her father hunched, trying to hide his face. There would be no hiding from this. His shame was on full display, and oddly she felt nothing. No triumph, no sadness. Perhaps that would come later. Right now, all she felt was release. Adrien noticed her looking and gently guided her face away, shielding her from the frenzy with his body. "You don't have to watch that." "It's all right," she said, meeting his eyes. It needed to happen. He studied her for a moment, then brushed a kiss to her forehead. "You're incredible," he murmured. Ayla managed a tired smile. "I had a pretty good savior." They answered the detective's questions as succinctly as possible, both of them aware of the whirring cameras trying to capture any morsel. Ayla's recorded evidence on her phone, combined with Richard's likely testimony and all of Adrien's compiled proof, meant her father's fate was sealed. The detective confirmed as much with a respectful nod. "Thank you, Miss Hart. And I have to say, what you and Mr. Viscari did, it took guts. We'll take it from here." Once they were free to go, Adrien led Ayla past the barricades where reporters shouted her name. He kept her shielded, a supportive arm around her as they made their way to an unmarked car waiting at the curb. His own, not a police vehicle. One of his lieutenants was at the wheel, and he nodded as they got into the back. As the car pulled away from the chaos, Ayla let out a long breath. Adrien took her hand and raised it to his lips. "It's over," he said softly. "It's over," she agreed, squeezing his fingers. And it was. Her father's power over her, over all of them, was broken. The nightmare was finally ending. 2 weeks later, Ayla stood in the sunshine outside the county courthouse, feeling the warmth on her face as if for the first time. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, the kind of day that hinted at new beginnings. In the time since that fateful day at the warehouse, life had transformed. Caleb Hart sat in jail awaiting a slate of charges ranging from fraud and embezzlement to conspiracy and attempted kidnapping. With Richard Hale's extensive cooperation, trading testimony for leniency, prosecutors were confident Caleb would not see freedom again for a very long time, if ever. Lorenzo Morelli and his surviving associates were likewise behind bars, their criminal empire crumbling without its head. Ayla had spent the days following picking up the pieces of her own life. She visited her mother daily. With Caleb gone, Ayla had swiftly assumed legal control of her mother's care and moved her to a better facility owned by a medical trust separate from the Hart Foundation. Never again would her mother's well-being be used as a weapon. As for the Hart Foundation itself, Ayla had addressed the board, most of whom were as much victims of Caleb's deceit as the public, and, with Adrien's lawyers quietly aiding, arranged for a full audit and restitution plan. She resigned from her nominal spokesperson role, but accepted a genuine position as an oversight trustee to ensure the charity would be managed with integrity going forward. It was oddly freeing to step into a role on her own terms, not as her father's puppet. "Your mother's on her way home," came Adrien's gentle voice from behind her. Ayla turned to see him descending the courthouse steps. He'd accompanied her to the brief hearing that finalized the transfer of Caleb's frozen assets toward her mother's medical trust and other reparations. Now he was by her side, as he had been every day since. "She's excited to have dinner with us tonight," Adrien added with a soft smile. Ayla's mother had taken a great liking to him, perhaps seeing in Adrien the devoted protector Caleb never was. Ayla reached for Adrien's hand and laced her fingers with his. It felt steady and right. "Thank you," she said, conveying in that simple phrase the depth of her gratitude, not just for the update on her mom, but for everything. For standing by her, for giving her strength, for loving her. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to it. "Anything for you?" he replied. They walked together toward his car, parked under the shade of a big oak tree along the street. One of Adrien's men leaned against the hood, acting as driver and bodyguard, though the threats had ebbed. As they approached, the man straightened and addressed Adrien. "Sir, a call just came in. It's about the Morelli faction. They're requesting a meeting to discuss terms." Adrien raised an eyebrow, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face at the interruption. He glanced at Ayla, clearly torn between stepping back into his role as Mafia boss and staying in this peaceful moment with her. Ayla gave his hand an encouraging squeeze. She looked to the bodyguard. "Tell them we'll schedule a meeting soon, and inform them that Mr. Viscari and I will both be attending." The guard nodded crisply. "Understood, Miss Hart." He moved away to relay the message into his phone. Adrien regarded Ayla with a mix of pride and mild worry. "You know, you don't have to involve yourself in any of that if you don't want to." Ayla turned to face him fully, reaching up with her free hand to straighten the lapel of his suit jacket. She had long since discarded her meek wardrobe. Today she wore a simple white dress, and the way Adrien looked at her made her feel powerful and seen. "I know I don't have to," she said with a smile, "but I want to. No more being shut out of decisions that affect my life. No more cages." Adrien's eyes softened. He brushed a thumb tenderly over the back of her hand. "No contracts. No cages," he echoed, referring to the promise he'd made her that first night. "You're a free woman, Ayla. I just want you to choose what makes you happy." She rose on her toes and kissed him. A slow, sweet kiss in the dappled sunlight under that oak tree. When she pulled back, she looked him straight in the eye. "I choose you, Adrien. I choose facing everything together with you." He let out a breath, one of pure contentment, and wrapped his arms around her waist. Together then, he murmured. Together. Isla savored the word. Once it had seemed impossible. Now it was her reality. Adrien opened the car door for her, and she slipped in. Instead of moving around to the other side, he leaned on the doorframe, taking a moment just to look at her. The afternoon light caught the warmth in his gray eyes as he smiled. "You realize," he said lightly, "the next time we have a formal dinner, I expect you to wear your very best." Ayla laughed, catching the teasing note in his voice. "Oh? And why is that?" He reached out and twirled a strand of her hair playfully before tucking it behind her ear. His expression turned gently serious, voice full of adoration. "Because you wore your worst dress to disappear," he said. "Now I'm choosing you, so you can finally be seen." Ayla's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. In that single line, he captured the essence of their journey, the fear, the love, the second chance. She felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears shining bright. Blinking them back, she smiled and pulled him in for one more kiss, soft, lingering, full of love. "I'm here," she whispered against his lips, "and I'm not disappearing again." Adrien brushed his nose against hers, a tender gesture that made her giggle softly. "And I see you, Ayla," he whispered in return, framing her face with his hands gently, reverently. As Adrien moved to the other side of the car and slid in beside her, Ayla reached over and took his hand in hers. Their fingers interlocked effortlessly. The driver started the engine, and they began to pull away, on leaving the courthouse and the dark chapter it represented behind. Ayla glanced at Adrien. He turned to meet her gaze, and in his eyes she saw not the calm, controlled mask of a Mafia boss, but the man she loved, the one who had fought for her, risked everything for her, and given her the freedom to be herself. She squeezed his hand. "Whatever comes next," she said softly, "we face it together." A slow grin spread across Adrien's face. He lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to the back of hers. "Together?" he agreed. And as the car merged into the bright afternoon traffic, Ayla leaned her head on Adrien's shoulder, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Secure in the knowledge that she was loved, she was free, and she would never be invisible again. Together, they would face every challenge, every joy, side by side.